Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mrs. Lim Hui Hua, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office and Second Minister for Finance and Transport. She is accompanied by our guest speaker, Mr. Niels Anderson, Partner and Group CEO of AP Moller Maersk, and Mr. Andreas Somenpau, Board Member for Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Lim Hui Hua, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, Second Minister for Finance and Transport, Mr. Niels Anderson, Partner and Group CEO of AP Moller Maersk, Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Transport, Mr. Lucian Wong, Chairman, Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the 5th Singapore Maritime Lecture 2011. My name is Murni and I will be your MC for this afternoon. As you may be aware, the Singapore Maritime Lecture is a key event of the Singapore Maritime Week, and this year sees the 5th installment of the series. Launched in 2007, the Singapore Maritime Lecture attracts and engages thought leaders on a wide variety of maritime industry issues. Without further ado, I would now like to invite the lecture's moderator, Mr. Andreas Somenpau, MPA Board Member and CEO of BW Maritime, to deliver his introductory remarks. Mr. Somenpau, please.
Minister Lim Hui Hua, distinguished guests, good afternoon and welcome to all of you. It gives me great pleasure to be introducing the speaker for today's Singapore Maritime Lecture, the 5th in a series of very distinguished speakers that started with our Minister Mentor, Lee Kuan Yew, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. The caliber of speakers and audience at this lecture series is a good mirror for the successful growth of Singapore as a major international maritime centre and as a maritime thought capital. Today, we are honoured to have Mr. Niels Smedegård Andersen, Partner and Group CEO of the AP Moller Maersk Group, to deliver the lecture. AP Moller Maersk needs no introduction. In addition to being the largest container shipping company in the world with about 15% market share, it is also the 4th largest operator of container terminals and a major player in the tanker, offshore and oil and gas sectors. Mr. Andersen took on his role as Group CEO in 2007, having previously been the chief executive of Carlsberg, one of the world's top brewers. He has led the company to a number of successes, not least its best results ever last year, and he has received a number of distinguished accolades, including the Order of Dannebrog by Her Majesty the Queen of Denmark. We find ourselves today at an interesting juncture for the world maritime industry. On the one hand, we see tremendous economic growth in some parts of the world, which is driving shipping demand. On the other hand, oversupply of ships is putting rates under severe pressure in many sectors, and asset prices have fallen significantly from the peak. As you all know, oil prices and bunker costs are rising, parts of the Middle East and North Africa are in turmoil, piracy is growing, and environmental pressures are increasing. At least for the dry and liquid bulk sectors, I'm reminded of the wise guy who said, "It's not the fall that hurts you, it's the sudden stop at the end." It is the perfect time, in short, to be listening to the thoughts of an industry leader who represents such a broad range of maritime interests. As I'm sure he won't be able to cover all possible topics in his speech, I hope that you will think of plenty of questions to ask him at the end of his remarks so that we can get some good insights into the prospects for our industry. Please join me now in welcoming Mr. Niels Smedegaard Andersen.
Well, Minister, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure for me to be here today. It's a great honor to be asked to speak at this distinctive event, and it's also a great honor actually to be able to stand here as a hopefully valued, surely valued, and hopefully a good corporate citizen of Singapore, because Singapore is one of the really good places to do business. And I think having a maritime conference here in Singapore, it is very, very well placed. Singapore is, as you all know, a vibrant hub for business. And even if we are a Danish company and being present all over the world, Singapore is actually the only place outside Denmark where we have basically all our business units together. And it is really a natural second headquarter for us, in particular when I think of the importance that Asia is getting in the future. We have our biggest fleet outside Denmark registered here. We're passing 80 vessels this year, and we expect to pass 100 in a couple of years. And that gives us more than 5 million tons of gross tonnage, more than 10% of Singapore's ship register. We also do our global crewing here. This is natural since we have large number of Asian on our vessels. But the reason why we put it here is, of course, again, that it is a very good place to work and live, and we think it's also a very good place to commute out of. What is perhaps less natural, but it speaks to the very high level of technological expertise, is that we also order quite a number of ships and drilling rigs here, and we have just a couple of weeks ago placed an order for 2 very large drilling rigs with Keppel, who've delivered many good rigs for us. So there are many good reasons for being in Singapore. Singapore has, as a city and as a country, always placed great emphasis on being a good place to do business, and they've created excellent conditions for all of us to prosper with our businesses, with a minimum of bureaucracy, and always an ability and a willingness to listen. I think nowhere else in the world do we have this situation where we actually get asked by the government what would we like, how would we like to, what conditions would we appreciate to build our businesses further. And Singapore has a very strong talent pool and is doing a lot actively to build capabilities by getting active in research with the Singapore Maritime Institute, also here creating a focus point for increased dialogue with our industry. So the conditions are really unique and a league of their own. But we know, of course, all, and I think everybody in shipping has experienced that in the last years, that the world changes at unprecedented speed. And no matter how good your track record is, you can be outpaced in a few years if you get complacent, don't manage well, or stop listening. This is true for ports, cities, and, of course, shipping companies. We are a global mobile industry. We can move around quite easily, and there is a lot of competition going on in other parts of other countries surrounding Singapore. So I think it is only because everybody here are convinced that Singapore will continue to listen, continue to improve, and continue to help us drive our business, that we are all so focused on participating, being part of it, and really being convinced that Singapore will also in the future present the best opportunities for growing shipping businesses in this region. But it, of course, in order to stay on your toes and see what is important, I think I will also talk a little bit about what we see is important. And in some of these cases, Singapore really distinguishes itself from, I think I can say, any other country. It's very important to have timely and regulation, including tax regulations that is fair, that is laid out for the long term, and is very transparent. I think it's quite easy for a new hub that wants to compete to come with a very attractive tax rate or a very attractive subsidy system that will lure people to go there in the short run, but we have, since we're investing a 30 or 40 years horizon, we have of course to be convinced that this is for the long term, and this is what Singapore has offered and will offer in the future. Another thing is that it should maintain very simple and efficient processes that makes it easy for business to deal. Shipping is not sort of a standard industry where everybody is doing the same. We all have to find our niches, and almost no order is the same. So we have to be flexible, we have to adapt and change the fleets we're operating and change a lot of things, and also here flexibility and listening is very important. One risk that I believe Singapore is facing is the risk of rising cost levels. Again, we're facing competition from the rest of the world, and it is very necessary that the cost levels here are kept in line with what we can pay, so that no businesses are driven out just for that reason. That doesn't mean that Singapore has to be competitive in all parts of all elements of shipping activities, but at least the core parts of the business has to be competitive. And then I would say it's also very important that a good finance industry is developed. Shipping is to a large extent driven by finance, and effective and modern finance systems without being reckless and without supporting the wrong businesses are very important for the future. But so much for Singapore. We're proud to be here, and I'm sure all of you share my sentiments when I say that this is just a very great place to do business. Shipping, and you've all experienced that in the last years, but shipping is of course very, very closely linked to the development in the global economy, and both as a prerequisite and also our earnings are affected. Without shipping, there would be no global wealth development to the extent we've seen, and when global wealth development stops or we experience global problems, the first to feel it are also the shipping industry. We feel at A.P. Møller-Mærsk that at present the global economy is on the right track. We appreciate, of course, that there are plenty of short-term obstacles or problems or challenges at the moment, starting with the very unfortunate situation in Japan, to the equally unfortunate situation in North Africa, where a lot of people are suffering. But we do believe that fundamentally the long-term perspective of the world is excellent, and even the short-term and mid-term, in spite of hiccups, we are very confident that the good development in global business will continue. But that does definitely not, in our opinion, mean that yesterday's strategy will work in the future. Just as an example, and that makes it even more interesting to be in Asia these days, is that the global economy is tipping in balance. We are seeing that the mature markets are having big trouble getting their growth back, getting their economic development back, and getting their debt levels under control after the financial crisis. And the recovery is simply very slow, and I think we will have to live with that for quite a while. And it is really reflecting the underlying fact that the world is tipping. Much more of the global growth will be driven from the developing markets, and we as business people have to adjust to that. I think coming from one of the mature markets, that in the mature markets, the mature economies, we will experience these gradual adjustments as crisis, and there will be crisis in the markets that will not adjust to the future, but it will not be necessarily a global crisis. And as the developing markets grow, also the growth impetus here will be sufficient in many cases to overcome the minor adjustment crisis that's seen from here the Western world will experience on an unfortunately probably quite frequent basis. And that puts a lot of pressure on our companies to be both flexible and strong. Asia is becoming really a very exciting part of the world to do business in. If we just look at the past, it will be, in many cases, we will be talking about sourcing, about sending goods for the developed markets, the mature markets. but now it's becoming an area of consumption and an area of development itself. Just as an example, in last year, in 2010, in China, 18.1 million cars were sold. I happened to be there last month, and I believe the figure just for January this year was almost 2 million cars. This is far above what the US car market is, and just shows how things are really moving in that direction. Also, in our company, we see our intra-Asia business is booming. We had growth rate in the intra-Asia business of 40% last year, and I don't think any other trade can even hope of getting into these figures. And we are expanding our terminals business here as fast as we can. We'll actually open a terminal in Cap May tomorrow, and this part of building up infrastructure here is very exciting. It's not just Asia. A lot of talk about Asia, even more talk about China sometimes, but also other parts of the world are developing, even though with smaller populations. Of course, their global weight is also smaller. But if we take the major countries in Latin America, South America, they're also rapidly advancing, driven by plenty ample natural resources, and also increasing consumption and increasing appetite for goods also imported from Asia. We experience this firsthand. We are putting in operation, starting this month, a number of new ships, 16 vessels specialized for South America, being able to carry plenty of finished goods over there, and plenty of refrigerated fresh fruit and fruits back to Asia. We're also investing in terminal capacity there, and we see the rapid build-up that is necessary to keep speed and keep track of the politicians' ambitions, and this is going to be a lot of investment from the rest of the world. We also see, although it's not globally the case in Africa, but we see a number of African countries also developing very well. Of course, often on the back of increased commodity prices, good export potential for commodity prices, but also for gradually improving competitive environment locally, and hopefully also much better governance that we in some cases have seen in the past. And also here we're launching a new string of vessels specialized for Africa with low draft that can enter the quite complicated ports in these areas, in addition to also being a major investor in African ports over the last many years. But how do all these changes really play into how we as shipping companies should act? One thing is, of course, that you have to keep your market focus. And I think it is very, very important that we realize that the new frontiers of shipping, the new frontiers of maritime activity, will be the new areas where things are moving faster than they are in the mature economies. When the balance of the economy is shifting to the Asia, Africa, and Latin America, it means that infrastructure put in place here will have much more potential than in the mature market, simply because of the growth rates, simply because those of us in infrastructure can hope that there will occasionally be lack of capacity. So here we have two hearts in our chest. The other thing that we need to take a lot of care of is that we stay passionately focused on our customers. We have, of course, great pride in our ships, and I think with good reason. Great vessels, great traditions, a lot of innovation, but the really important thing is that we have to stay agile and all the time being alert to the needs of the customers, understanding that what we're doing has to be good for them, making sure that we don't work past